If you've ever finished painting a model and you spent a minimum of at least 2 hours staring at it, go ahead and hit that like button. Gentlemen, welcome to Conversion Beam. Today I wanted to try something that I've rarely seen done before, and that would be a Rhino conversion. But then I got thinking and I thought, I don't want to do something that's rarely been done. I want to do something that's never been done. Now I have seen a few Rhinos painted in the scheme, but I've never seen a conversion of an Apothecarian Rhino. And that's what we'll be tackling today. Now there's a fair few Rhino kits to choose from. I was tossing up between a Rhino Primaris and a Deimos Rhino, but I ultimately ended up going with this old Stalker I had lying around. I purchased this secondhand a while ago from my Iron Hands army, and it came pre-assembled, and I'm so glad that whoever built it used super glue, because my first step is to remove the Imperialis on the front, because I'm kidding, I'm kidding. It's a funny joke, haha, very funny. You really don't need to tell the Inquisition about this. Anyways, once I've got that off, I use a dull knife to scrape away the super glue that was underneath, and I repeat the process for the second eagle. My next step is to remove all the clutter from the top. I do love extra detail, but this just looks a bit too overcrowded to me. If you ever find yourself doing something like this, I'd recommend slicing all the way through with a knife, because if you pull at it, the super glue might tear a chunk of plastic out of the model like it did for me. I could already tell that when I had to clean the surface, those rectangles are going to get in the way. Not wanting to deal with that, I cut them away using a sharp knife. And then I grab a dull blade and I use this to scrape away at the surface until I'm confident it'll appear flat once prime is applied. Reasonably satisfied of that, I move on to the general cleaning of the model. In this step, any over-applied superglue, any mold lines, any sprue tabs are all removed from the model. Now the next step is very important. If you skip it, you'll receive no forehead kisses for the rest of your life. This is something I've done for you every single night, right after you fall asleep. Do you really want to lose that? And that's drilling down the exhaust stacks. I honestly think leaving those flat is a bigger crime than not drilling your barrels. Anyways, I start clearing away the old bases for the broken antennas, making some room to add new ones later on. Now the final bit of bodywork I wanted to do before adding new stuff on was to fill in those holes in the front. Probably should have done a bit of research before using this AK Interactive modeling putty, cause this straight up ruined my day. I tried to apply it using my finger and I made the biggest mess possible. All my clumsy attempts to make it neat just made it significantly worse. So I figured my best option here was to clean it once it's dried. So the next day I started scraping away, and I started thinking to myself, there's no way I'm getting this out of all the crevices, and I've lost too much detail, I've ruined the model. But with sheer willpower and hours of work, I managed to recover all of the detail that was lost. I was pretty bummed out that I had to go through all that, but what's worse is that I didn't even fill in the holes. I'm not saying it's a bad product, I'm just saying I probably didn't use it correctly. So I break out the old faithful milliput, trying again to fill in those slots. And it looked good at the time, but once I got paint on the model, I realized it didn't work as well as I'd hoped, and that certainly reflected on the final product, but I don't think it ended up being too noticeable. At this point I was considering cutting off the stability pegs at the bottom, but I ultimately decided against it since I'm adding a heavy servo arm later on. And I figured if the Rhino ever needs to move something heavier than itself, having those extra anchor points could prove very beneficial for it. So with all the bodywork done, I can finally start making additions to this tank. The first thing I'm going to add is a hunter-killer missile from the Horus Heresy vehicle upgrade sprue. Once that is cut out, cleaned and assembled, I just glue it straight down next to the Stormbolter. The next thing I wanted to add was a big searchlight to one of the weapon hardpoints, but the best thing I could find was a scanner array from the Impulsor kit. It's not exactly what I was looking for, but honestly it's a really good fit. Once I glued it down, I was really happy with how it looked. The next bit is also from the Impulsor kit. It's just a spare antennae that I never ended up using. And this slots right in place at the area we cleared up earlier, where the old antenna used to be. With that glued down, we can move on to the next part. And here I'm going to be using a smoke launcher from the Horus Heresy upgrade kit again. It's just so much better looking than the old retro smoke launchers. The place I want to glue this down has a bit of detail in the way, so I'm going to need to cut it down with a sharp knife and scrape it flat with a dull one. I did get a little bit worried for a second that radar dish would block it from firing, but it does clear it. Satisfied of that, I can begin work on the Rhino's custom graviton-assisted heavy servo arm. For the base plate, we're going to be combining this utility hardpoint from the Impulsor, which we already know is a good fit, and these mortar barrels from the Astra Militarum Field Ordnance Kit. To ensure a flat surface on the Impulsor bit, I cut away that protruding circular piece on top, and of course scrape it flat with a dull knife. I repeat this process on the bottom of the Astra Militarum bit, removing that rectangular nub. With that complete, I glue those two pieces together, and I set them aside for later. Again, from that same Astra Militarum kit, I grabbed this las cannon. This will make up the bulk of the servo arm, but I'm going to need to do a bit of modification to make it work. I start by cutting away those knobs on top, and I clean the surface. Next, I clip away the cogwheel, trying my best not to damage it, because I actually want to use that later. Once that is cleaned, I grab the Librarian Dreadnought arm from the Blood Angels Furiosa Dreadnought kit. I intend to make this the head of the servo arm assembly, so I line them up to get a better perspective on where I want to cut, to remove the Dreadnought shoulder piece. When I put down a bit of pressure to cut away those wires, I nearly snapped the piece in half. While I was able to bend it back in place, that joint is permanently weakened, making me very hesitant to use it, but I didn't see this conversion working out without using it, so I forged on, placing my cuts as carefully as I could. With that done, I grabbed one of the landmines from the Infiltrator and Incursor kit. I felt like this piece would be a good stand-in for a graviton generator, and that divot in the middle would be essentially perfect to house the area of the Dreadnought arm that I just cut, which I achieved by drowning it in glue. Now you'll see there's a pretty outstanding hole here, and I decided to cover that up using a servo skull from, I think, the old Cadian Shock Trooper kit. This is done by cutting away the pipes at the bottom and then trimming the back of the skull so it's flat, making the process of gluing it on very simple. Now to act as the grabby thing for the servo arm, I used this very old claw from I believe the Venerable Dreadnought kit. This seriously fits inside the Incursor mine like a glove, no modification needed. With the base and the head of the servo arm complete, all that's left to do is the body. For that, I ended up dipping back into the Astra Militarum Field Ordnance kit. Since they were originally used to pivot the las cannon I'm using, it wouldn't really make sense to use anything else. After clipping away those bars, I slide them into the las cannon and test fit them against the base. I was happy with the fit, but before I glued it on, I decided I want the las cannon to sit upside down to separate it from, well, that distinctive las cannon look a little bit more. Once that is glued on and dry, I clip away the extra pivot points and the muzzle for the las cannon. After scraping that end cap flat in preparation to attach the head assembly, I realized both of these pieces have similar diameter holes that are supposed to line up with each other. I found a tube from the retro smoke launcher slots in perfectly, so I used that as the connector piece. So once that's shaved down to size, these bits fit together like two lesbians and a cucumber. Once that's complete, I attach a targeting system on the side of the body. I'm not sure if this came from the Repulse Executioner or the Gladiator kit, but I'm liking its vibe. I felt like some sort of cowling needed to be added to really cement this as a tool used by Space Marines. So I used this bit of armor plating from, I believe, the Storm Talon gunship. It's got the right size I'm looking for, and it's almost got the right shape, but it's going to need a little bit of modification. First, I carve away the detail on the side, and then using a pair of clippers, I cut out the rough shape that I'm looking for. With that done on both sides, I get a knife out and scrape down to refine the edges a bit more, and also ensure that both the cuts match each other a bit more precisely. After test fitting, I can immediately see that those two pieces in the middle will need to be trimmed down. So I get that done and I glue it down. So now it's time to reattach that cogwheel. It takes quite a few cuts to get it down to the size I want, but once it's on, I'm not stoked with how it looks, but I revisit it a bit later in the video. The last add-on for the servo arm is this piece. I have no clue what it is, I don't know where I got it from, but I have like 20 of them. So after clipping off the hinge on the back of that cowling, I glue it down. I was originally going to just glue down the servo arm and have this Astra Militarum cable run through the back of it, but I decided against it because I want to eventually magnetize it down the track. But I don't have any magnets powerful enough yet, so what you see later in the video is just blue tack. With that executive decision made, we can move on to the final part of this conversion, and that would be an exterior Medicae station. I got this idea from purging heretics on Darktide, or maybe more so getting purged by heretics on Darktide and having to use the Medicae station. Anyways, the base for this is going to be the cockpit interior from the Storm Talon gunship. If you hold it at this angle, I think it makes for a pretty convincing terminal. But as you may see, it's going to take a fair bit of cutting to make it fit. So I start by removing big chunks with the clippers, and then making more precise cuts with the knife, test fitting as I go. This takes a good amount of trial and error, but once I find the angle I'm looking for, I run it across some sandpaper to get it flat, removing those pesky hinges before I glue it in place. Now, you'll be able to see despite my efforts, there's still a slight gap there, but don't worry, I address that a bit later. To really sell this as a Medicae station, I wanted to add vital fluids to each side of it. To achieve that, I decided to use an Astra Militarum Flamer backpack. So I proceeded to cut it in half and remove the attached pieces. To achieve the effect I'm going for, I'm going to have to cut away the skull. Once that is complete, I can glue them both to the Medicae station. Now, if we're counting blunders made during this conversion, I believe this would be number 3. Here I have the interior panel for a Storm Raven gunship, and after going through all this effort cutting and sanding, I realize I'm not really happy with how it looks. So I return that to the bits box and pull out another panel from the same kit. And after cutting it down to size, I realized this one doesn't look half bad. So after I glue that down, I use this old Dreadnought faceplate to cover up a hole that's very visible from the top. And then I finally decide to do something about the gap I mentioned earlier. First, I come up with this really interesting idea using a chainsaw. But like a microsecond into test fitting, I realized it looks so stupid. So I whip out the milliput, and using my extremely limited sculpting skills, I just shove it in that hole and scrape away until it's flat. I repeat this process on the other side, and I think it looks a little bit better than the first attempt. Now, I didn't film this part, but I figured while I have the milliput out, I might as well fill in this gap on a servo arm that's bothering me so much. Listen, I know they're not perfect, and I know they're very little sculpts, or if you can even call them sculpts, but I'm very satisfied with how these turned out. Alright, so now we're really on the final stretch for this conversion. The second last piece we're going to be adding is a little servo arm from the Cataphoron Destroyer kit. This slots in place very nicely behind the panel, and I use that top cover bit to give it another connection point for more stability. And now for the very last piece of this conversion, I'm going to be cheating a little bit. I've had this 3D printed apothecary drill in my bits box for many years, and this is just a perfect chance to use it. I do hope you can forgive me for being an absolute heretic. And that completes the conversion. I am mostly happy with how this turned out. I kind of wish I put a servitor in the Medicae station instead of that panel. And I also wish I committed to filling in those holes a bit more. It would have given me a bit more space for the freehand apothecary symbol, which was also my first attempt at freehand, so go easy on me. Now, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, because it'll make me really happy to see you in the next one. Thanks.